John MacArthur wrote an article on the Christian cliche, love the sinner, hate the sin. In this article, he actually talks about howdy y'all, I'm Brylan. Now I've done videos covering both times that John MacArthur went on the Ben Shapiro show. They were absolutely fascinating conversations. In fact, I did a video covering the very last time that John MacArthur was on Ben's show. It's called John MacArthur Said This to Ben Shapiro. Again, fascinating conversation that I think is absolutely worth the watch. You can also go watch my video reacting to the news of John MacArthur's death called What They Won't Tell You About the Death of John MacArthur. But I remember people saying things like, why would John MacArthur go on Ben Shapiro's show? And John MacArthur shouldn't be talking to Ben Shapiro, and vice versa. Basically, the stupidest stuff you'll ever hear. Well, I'm going to show you what Ben Shapiro had to say about the death of John MacArthur. I think it's going to actually shock a lot of people. Real quick, would you consider hitting that thumbs up button? When you like this video, it'll get pushed out to more people, and it would really help spread the truth. But first, listen to John MacArthur talk about how he feels about offending people.
Do you remember I did an interview with Ben Shapiro? He said to me, does it bother you that you offend people? I said, no, I offend people on purpose. I don't want to personally offend them by a lack of love or care or kindness or compassion. But I'm sorry, this word from God is offensive. Worship me correctly or die.
Wow, what a sobering reminder of how easy it is for us to stop ourselves from speaking out or proclaiming the truth because we don't want to be offensive, and how the world has seemingly turned telling the truth into being unloving. It's a twisted manipulation that Satan absolutely loves. I've seen the absolute hate and vitriol pouring out against John MacArthur from proclaimed Christians. It's disgusting, and I won't even show these people personally because I don't want to give them the attention that they're desperately seeking. But some of it's coming from very well-known Christian reporters and Christian influencers. And of course, the keyboard warriors. In fact, you can see how the mainstream media is even reacting to the death of John MacArthur. Ground News shows us how the left and the right are reacting. The left is trying to convince you that firebrand pastor John MacArthur leaves a legacy that is divisive. The truth is divisive. And the right is saying Pastor John MacArthur, defender of religious liberty during co-fraud lockdowns, dies at 86. Stop guessing who's telling you the truth. Ground News helps you find out what news outlets are the most biased. Their blind spot feature shows you when the left or the right isn't covering the news that you should know about. You can also see who owns each news outlet. And if you go to ground.news/Brylan or scan the QR code on the screen, you can get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I personally use. Thank you for supporting the sponsor of this video, Ground News. It helps me to continue to bring you daily news videos that you can trust. But listen to Ben Shapiro expose who John MacArthur really was.
MacArthur, of all the people that I know in this sphere, I know quite a few, was absolutely staunch in his defense of the Bible. He is somebody who certainly never shied away from the messages of the New Testament, and somebody who made himself controversial because of that, which I think is quite a good thing. In the first interview that I did with him, a lengthy interview, he spent fully 30 minutes of the interview talking to me about why I ought to convert to Christianity. And as a Jew, I will say that not only do I not find that insulting, I find that absolutely useful. Why? Because he is saying the thing that he believed. And I think that that is a good thing. And the reason I considered him a friend is because he's somebody who cared about my eternal soul. We could have disagreements on what would happen, with regard to heaven or hell, or whether the New Testament was truth or not truth, depending on whether you're a Christian or a Jew. But I was never upset by the fact that he believed that I ought to convert to Christianity, because of course many Christians believe that I ought to convert to Christianity. It's not an insult. That's because somebody cares for my spiritual welfare, and we disagree about how best to attain that spiritual welfare.
So people love to say that Ben Shapiro exposed John MacArthur. Well, he did expose who John MacArthur really was. He exposed John MacArthur as a man that desperately wanted to see him come to faith in Jesus Christ as his personal Lord and Savior. He exposed that John MacArthur was a man that loved the message of the gospel and didn't care who it offended. He was going to share the gospel at all costs. In fact, at the end of the first episode that John MacArthur did on the Ben Shapiro show, this is right after he gets done explaining that Isaiah 53 points to Jesus and how the Old Testament is pointing the way to Jesus Christ. MacArthur goes on to say this personally to Ben Shapiro.
I want to say this to you personally. You are a testimony to the glory of God in man. I see the beauty of God's creation in you. I see the use of reason and compassion and care. I see so many things in you. So I'm not denying that reflection of God in you, but I'm saying you either believe Jesus is the Savior or you don't, and that's the distinction. Apart from that, just this one conversation with you, I could spend endless hours with you and be the far richer for it, but I would always be saying the same thing.
Well, I do have one final question for Pastor John, and that question is going...
And then Ben Shapiro blushes and quickly moves on to the next subject. But these are the types of interaction that Ben Shapiro was saying when he reacted to the death of John MacArthur. That it was always John MacArthur's intent to share the gospel, share the truth, and John MacArthur didn't care how it made Ben Shapiro feel. As you can see in this instance, John MacArthur was very tactful, very loving, and genuinely sounded like he wanted to lead Ben Shapiro to the truth. He's so close. Ben Shapiro, you're almost there. In fact, also in this episode, they do a whole segment of the differences between Judaism and Christianity. I think it's absolutely fascinating how John MacArthur points to the similarities of Judaism and Christianity, but ultimately how the way to salvation is only through the gospel of Jesus Christ. A man named Matt Carobini, I believe, he said this about working on Ben Shapiro's show and how during this very interaction, that this interview I just showed you, he said this: many of you have seen the interview where Pastor John MacArthur shares the gospel with Ben Shapiro through Isaiah 53. That moment was easily the highlight of my time at the Daily Wire. But what happened after the camera stopped rolling is something I'll never forget. He says, as soon as filming wrapped, Ben turned to Pastor John and said he was very familiar with Isaiah 53 from the Jewish perspective and that he'd love to have him back to discuss it further. Without missing a beat, Pastor John smiled and replied, "Oh, I know the Jewish perspective very well too. In fact, I wrote a book on it." Then he turned to his son, who handed him the very book Pastor John had brought specifically for Ben. It was a simple moment, but it said everything about his uncompromising courage. He was prepared and eager to make known the mercies of God. I am grateful for his faithfulness until the end. Megan Basham said this. She's said many fantastic things about John MacArthur. Her tributes to John MacArthur are wonderful. But she had this to say regarding Ben Shapiro's tribute to MacArthur. She said, I haven't heard Ben Shapiro's tribute yet, but I will say that every time I talked to Pastor John, he urged me to witness to Ben, whom he liked and respected very much. Of course, he was only asking me to do what he had done himself. So I'm sorry, Ben. I will have to pick up the torch now and try to convince you of the veracity of the New Testament. John MacArthur wrote an article on the Christian cliche, love the sinner, hate the sin. In this article, he actually talks about the cliche of loving the sinner and hating the sin follows the same dualistic reasoning as Gnostic heresies, that we ought to effectively divorce the sinner from the culpability and consequences of sin. He goes on, worse still, it confuses and corrupts the very concept of what it means to love the sinner. True love does not demand willful ignorance. You wouldn't simply pretend that a cancer patient was suddenly free from his disease, nor would you ignore his affliction in hopes that it would go away on its own. That is so true. This is a fantastic article, by the way. I suggest you go read the entire thing. It breaks down the love the sinner, hate the sin cliche so well because it's so misused. But he ends by saying this: we should love sinners. We should hate sin. And we shouldn't divide those two truths into separate categories. Our hatred of sin should manifest itself in a love that warns sinners compassionately, but no less clearly, of the dire consequences their sin demands. Short of that, how could we ever claim to truly love them? And that's exactly what you see John MacArthur doing on Ben Shapiro here. Spreading the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ and how salvation comes through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and it is only through Jesus Christ that you can be saved. Just a quick reminder of the love that Jesus has for us. Look at Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. For while we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. But hey, let me know your thoughts about all this in the comment section. I would love to hear from you. And if you wouldn't mind hitting that subscribe button, join this community. I would love to hear from you on a regular basis. And please hit that thumbs up button, you know, when you like this video, to get pushed out to more people, and it would really help spread the truth. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.